What's going on, everyone? Today we're dealing with a very crucial, important topic: scales. I'm going to give you a lot of info. It's going to be foundational level info, so take your time with it. Press pause, stop, rewind, watch stuff again if you need to, but there's going to be a lot of info in here, and I want to make sure you absorb it because we're setting the foundation right now for playing the rest of our careers. Whatever we want to do in music, this is the foundational stuff. So yes, the seating and getting our energy right, all proper. This is now where we're digging into the real theory, and I'm stoked to give you all this info. It's gonna be really good stuff. What are scales? So scales, just to start off with, they make up melodies, they make up chords, and melodies plus chords equal songs. So right now, if we understand these, we are establishing the foundation, the proper foundation for understanding, playing, and even creating our own songs. So that's how important this is. It's going to be good stuff. What exactly is a melody? Let's get a little more precise with our definitions. Metaphorical, but precise. I would call it the specific path that the lyrics take. So if you had just Mary had a little lamb, right? The lyrics are moving in this pattern, and that pattern is the first three notes of a scale. That scale is our major scale. Da 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 da, do re mi fa sol la ti da 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 da, right? So da da da. We start on that third note. Mary had a little da 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 na 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 na. And we jump up to the fifth note, etc. Don't try to memorize all that, but the point is the melody is moving along the scale, right? The lyrics are moving along on this thing called the melody. The melody is moving along on this thing called a scale. And then what are chords? I mentioned melody plus chords equals a song. Chords, I would call them the quality or the type of environment that these paths called the melodies wind through. So yes, we're going to be figuring out how to play the basis for melodies and chords with scales, and we're going to do it ergonomically, efficiently. We want to walk efficiently down any path we're going, so we can walk faster, run, skip, do cartwheels, do parkour, etc., whatever we want to do. But first we need to learn how to walk efficiently, and that's what we're setting up today. So first, let's take a look here at the basic overview so we can learn just kind of a review of what we dealt with last lesson and extend that a little bit so we can learn the mechanics of how to move efficiently on the keyboard. Alright, so welcome back. Let's take a look at the keyboard again. Remember what we talked about last time. Visual thinking and pattern recognition is really going to be our friend when we approach this unique looking object. Alright, so we remember the easiest way to detect, if we notice the structure of the keyboard, patterns in here, the easiest way to detect these patterns is by looking at these black keys, because they're grouped into groups of 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, and we can see that with our eyes. We can feel it with our hands. We know, even if we're not looking, which is a great practice tip. If you end up being able to practice without using your eyes, also really helpful. But while we got them, if we got them, let's use them and be grateful for them. So I'd like to just introduce a little fun terminology for these. I'm going to call these the 3 queens, and I'm going to call these the 2 kings, just so I don't have to say every time the bottom of the 3 black keys. I can say the bottom of the 3 queens. Queens is quicker than black keys, I guess. So we got our 3 queens and our 2 kings, and then we have all these white keys that lay lower, right? We notice they're lower down here, and they extend all the way down to the bottom of the keyboard. So the black keys sit above these white keys, and they're recessed, they're pulled back from the bottom. And now let's do something with our hands. Let's notice, if we just lay our hands on here, we have 3 fingers that are longer than these 2 outside ones. So I'm just gonna set them right here, and if you set your 3 middle fingers on the 3 queens right here, you'll notice they kind of line up pretty nice, right? Index finger of the right hand on the lower of the 3 queens, and the ring finger of the left hand on the lower of the 3 queens, right? And that makes the opposite, the ring finger of the right hand and the index finger of the left hand on the upper of the 3 queens. All right, so I learned this little this little tips and trick from amazing piano master called Korea, and I'll include a link to the video that he made below discussing how he uses this shape. But you just see how thumbs and pinkies fall nicely on these white keys right outside of it, and the middle three fingers fall nicely on these black keys. That's gonna help us figure some stuff out later, figure out how to move around, right? But we'll just note that for now. The purpose of the Chick Korea video, by the way, is to help you. Start talking about this. Help you move fingers together that aren't, instinctually or intuitively even supposed to move together. So if I wanted to press on the lower of these three black keys, of the three queens rather, using my index finger on the right hand and my ring finger on the left hand, we're not born with our index fingers and our right hand and our ring finger of our left hand moving at the same time. That's not a natural thing, right? So Chick Corea's got this exercise that, watch it at your leisure, maybe later on, kind of explaining a way to use this little shape to start linking up your right and left hands in a counterintuitive way. Now let's just take a look at I'll give you a hint of kind of what he gets at in that video. Let's practice moving our fingers just up and down, starting from the lower to the higher of the three queens. Let's just move around here. Right, up and down. And that's getting our middle fingers are hitting at the same time, right? Which I guess you could say could be easier to coordinate, but as I said, on our left we got two fingers that don't usually move together, and then another two fingers that don't usually move together. But when we practice this, we're starting to link them up, right? In our brain, we're starting to form new neurons that actually link these two movements together. So that helps. Now you could just start playing any pattern. We're just focusing on these three fingers again. So I could go right, down, all the way up, middle, up, down, right? Or middle, up, middle, down, middle, up, down, right? I could mix and match, do whatever I want, but it's just me getting used to playing these two hands at the same time, and it's a really useful thing for you to do. All right, so yeah, like I said, we weren't involved to do this, so we got to train this. All right, but the point being is we have this inner structure, this internalized structure of our hand, innate to our hands, that helps certain fingers work on better keys, and we're going to keep that in mind. This type of thinking is really going to help us as we move on and learn how to play keys in a really efficient way. So let's make a rule out of this. Essentially, we're gonna only play the black keys with these three middle fingers, right? It's not as efficient, and there'll be exceptions, of course, to this rule, but it's not as efficient to put our thumbs up onto the black keys or our pinkies up. We can do it. It definitely will happen occasionally, but in general, when you're figuring out how to finger scales, how to play them with which finger to play on which note, you're going to generally think that these three are going to go on here. They're also going to come down here, right? There's some scales that are just white keys, right? So you'll be using every finger on the white keys, but you're mainly going to use these three middle ones for the black keys, and pretty much exclusively you're going to use your pinky and thumb on these white keys. All right, you're going to so yeah, keep that in mind. That'll be helpful for us as we go on. Alright, so scales, what do? They take a starting point. They take any note, any of the 12, right? And then they move up to, what we called last time, the octave. So I like to start on this bottom of the three queens, and then I go from one to the other. This higher or lower version of it, right? So how do they do that? They use different paths of motion. We talked a little bit about that last time, right? Combinations of steps. So I told you that each step as we go up to piano is a half step, they call it. And then each time you skip one and you go up two, that's a whole step. So from here to here is a whole step. From here to here is a whole step, right? Because I skipped one. from here to here, from here to here is a whole step, right? Because I skipped over this one. All right, so we got combinations. Scales are, generally speaking, they can be other things, but they're combinations of half and whole steps. So that's a lot of scales fall into that category. So the major scale, when we heard Mary Had a Little Lamb, was we move in a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. All right, don't focus on memorizing that yet. I'll have charts below for you to figure this out. But if you want to just musicalize that knowledge, you can say whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, right? That's a pattern. You can kind of remember that kind of easy. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. You can make a melody out of it, whatever helps you remember. We've got the other scale I think we talked about last time, which is chromatic scale, right? And that's just moving all 12 notes, right? In our major scale, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, that was 7 notes. We talked about our minor scale, I think. I introduced that concept. So that's a different combination. It's whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole, whole, right? And when we go up, we always want to go down too. We want to practice going up and down. If we play with our left hand, we want to play with our right hand. We want to use both hands, use both directions in the keyboard as much as possible. We try not to get stuck in just one way of doing things, right? So if I just keep practicing, good, great, I went up, and I don't know how to go down, right? I want to get both. And if I just practice my right hand, I want to be like, all right, let me remember my left hand. Especially your non-dominant hand, you're going to put a little extra time into that. All right, so let's notice one thing about scales, one important thing about scales. The major and the minor scale, those two main ones we looked at, there are 7 notes in each of those scales. But if I just want to play that with one hand, I only have 5 fingers on this hand. So I've got to figure out how to play the scale in such a way as we're going to use a few fingers twice, but I got to know which fingers I'm going to use twice and where I'm going to change them over, where I'm going to switch, so where I'm going to double up, right? So in this case, I use my thumb twice, and I use these 2 fingers twice. So I use my first 3 fingers twice, and that's pretty common. Your first 3 fingers are going to get more use, although we really want to be able to use all of these fingers, all 5, because the pinky empowers us. Just like when we practice, we want to do our left and our right, our up and our down. We also want to get every finger involved that we can when it makes sense, and not just kind of lean on the crutch of stuff we're comfortable with. So yeah, enough preaching. You get it. So the simplest and easiest way to explain this is, how do we use 5 fingers to create 7 tones? What you might have seen me doing, what you might have noticed, is that I cross my thumb under when I'm going up with my right hand, and then when I'm going down with my right hand, I'm going to jump over with one of these 3 middle fingers. And it depends which one I'm going to land on, depending on where I'm going next. So we'll get more into that, but essentially you see me crossing over. My thumb's down here, and then my fingers jump over it. All right. On my left hand, it's the opposite. When I'm going up, my fingers will jump over, my 3 middle fingers, one of them, and then when I'm coming down, my thumb will go under. Right? See, that thumb went under. So that thumb under and fingers over is what enables us to go up and down the keyboard, play 88 notes or whatever we want to play with just 5 fingers efficiently and quickly. All right. So we want to crucially remember that we want to do that at the right time, right? And we'll get into that in a second and figure out exactly, how that works. And one thing from traditional piano education that can help us with that is this idea of numbering your fingers. So what they do often is they'll have, like when you see a score of piano music, they'll have if they have fingerings included, they'll have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 next to each note or above each note, and that'll tell you which finger to use. And the way they figure that out is each thumb is a 1, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Each pinky is a 5. So that's how and they'll usually signify left or right hand, or you can figure it out from context if you're using your left or right hand. All right, so that's something crucial to note. If you need reminder on that, just look up piano fingering numbers or fingering chart, finger numbers rather. But yeah, it's easy. Thumbs are 1, pinkies are 5. Just connect the dots. So these will help you if you want to read music. Like I said, this is not going to be a course in reading music, but what it is going to help you with for this course is to learn how to play all the major and minor scales using the correct fingering, right? Switching under when you want to switch under, and then landing with the finger you want to land with, okay? So you'll see a chart below, and if you see, it'll say right hand, RH, right? And so I'm gonna use my right hand, and if I'm, say, playing a C, right, it's gonna say 1, because it's my 1, 2, 3, 1, right? And how do I know I'm gonna pass under? Well, if it's my right hand and I see another 1, I'm gonna bring this. It wouldn't make sense to go over to get that, right? So it's gonna make sense for me to go under with my thumb. And then so it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then if I want to keep going up, it'll say 1 again. Sometimes they'll say 5 there. That's just if you want to end the phrase. So note in the chart that I'm gonna give you, it might say 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But there's nowhere to go from there, right? I mean, I can come under my pinky, it can work, but it's not really efficient. So what we do is, if you see that 5 and you want to keep going, which we usually want to practice at least 2 octaves, right? We don't want to just practice one little octave, because when we're playing, it's more realistic that we're moving up and down the keyboard plenty. So again, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Right, and that enables me, if I, instead of that 5, I put that 1 there, it enables me to keep going as long as I want. Alright, so yeah, if I see that with my left hand, let's see, it might say something. In this case, I'm playing a C. It's going to say 1, 4, remember, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, right? And the way that we know, we'll figure out how to think through this more for ourselves, but these charts are really helpful in knowing which to put next. Sorry, this Band-Aid is gross. So 1, 4, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, right? And I keep going, 4, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, etc. All right, so that's the fingering charts. They're down below. Remember those finger numbers. That's going to help you. Basically, I think I already explained this, but just in case, if I'm crossing over on the way up with my left hand, say, whatever I'm doing, if I'm doing it one way, then on the way down, I'm going to be jumping under, right? Same thing from right hand. If I cross under on the way up, I'm jumping over on the way down. All right, cool. So that's finger numberings and fingerings for the scales. Super crucial, super helpful. Another element of traditional teaching that we're not going to really use too much of yet at this point is the names of the notes, right? So I mentioned, okay, this is a C. I don't want you to focus on remembering the names of the notes right now, unless you really want to, or you want to like get into, talking with people about this immediately. I think they're really helpful to talk about music eventually, but they are not the priority, and they're not something you need to remember in order to make music. They're not what music is. I think traditional education often just treats them like they are music themselves, right? Like talking about notes, these A's and B's and C's and sharps and blah, 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 are music. It's not music. It's just one way of talking about, just one language. And I think it is kind of a mental trap a little bit. So focusing on them, I don't think is the move. In this video, you'll see them. They'll be on the keyboard here below when I play a G, right? You can see the letter G right here. And that's great. That's going to be helpful for you. Maybe it'll sink in unconsciously. And then I'll put a chart below as well so you can memorize them if you want to. They make talking about it easier. But most important thing is you don't want to get trapped in them. You don't want to be thinking through them. They can trap you in a certain way of thinking. And the most important thing we want to be focusing on at this stage is instead pattern recognition. And they are not describing any kind of comprehensible pattern. They're just arbitrary things we put on these. So they're not actual ways of thinking. So if we start on a single note, whatever we call it, no matter what we call it, and we follow a certain pattern of steps, whole, half, whole, half, or whole, half, whole, half, whole, or whole, whatever we want, that is what we're focusing on right now. That notion of recognizing the pattern. Visually, great. Feel-wise, yes. Sonically, most important. So the visual is an aid here to the sonic. We want to remember that sound most of all. We're going to focus on what does this sound like. And that's why we're starting with this major scale, just because it's really recognizable. You've all probably heard do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do somewhere, right? All right, cool. So back to the question of what is the most efficient way for our fingers to be moving. We already figured out one rule, right? Generally don't put our pinkies or thumbs on black keys if we don't need to. We will, so at some points, great. But for learning the proper fingerings, we don't need to do that pretty much. Remember this little structure right here. It's just what is natural for our hand. These middle things fall really nicely here and these down here. All right. The next thing we want to think about logically in terms of pattern recognition is when we're crossing our fingers over or under each other. So we're definitely not going to use all 5 fingers, right? And then come up to our 5th one and then try to switch, right? That would be, if I want to get up here to this next note, under it'd be super awkward. Over, also super awkward. Not something I want to do. All right. So great. We know not to do that. Awesome. We know we're kind of using our 4th finger, is like we don't want to go beyond that unless we're trying to end a phrase or we're not going scalar, like directly up and down. Like if we're bouncing around, we can use this. We can end or hit that. But if we want to keep going up, if we want to like have that motion up and down, doing these scales, we want to generally end on our 4th or even 3rd, right? Depending on. Right, so usually 4th and 3rd finger are where we're leaping to the under or over. Depends though. It could be the 2nd or the thumb, right? It could be jumping over the thumb, but it's usually not the 5th finger. All right, enough. So when we switch will be determined indeed by which note is our starting point. And thus which combination of black, white, and white keys is our pattern, or which just white keys, right? There is one scale that is just white keys, or there's multiple scales. But in the major scales, there's one that has no black keys in it. There aren't any major scales that don't have white keys in them. The next thing that we're thinking about is like, what does it set us up to do? So if I move under here, cool, that sets me up good, right? If I move over here and then I use my 3rd finger coming back down. If I use my 3rd finger coming back down. All right, I'm gonna leap over now, but to this little white one. That's not as right. We want to kind of use these for the black keys more. So if I use my 4th finger, that sets me up nice. Then I got a white key with my thumb and then a black key I can jump to, right? And here, if I would jump over with my 4th, I could do that, but then I'd have this extra thing, and then my thumb is ready to go right here, right? So it would be extra effort to go all the way. So instead of to my 3rd, which is smoother, my 4th would be wasting the motion, wasting the whole distance of a whole finger. And when we're moving quick, it might seem like not a big deal right now, but when we're moving fast, you don't want that. You don't want to be moving inefficiently, right? So you don't have to memorize all that what I just said, but essentially what I'm setting you up to think about is it's about, yes, when did I start, but it's about what does it set me up to do, right? What does this motion set me up to do? If I go with this finger, what does that establish? Ooh, I gotta do something weird there, right? I gotta use these middle fingers on right, I have to use one of these middle fingers on this tiny little part of the white key, which is up here, right? Because they're up this way, they're up further. So do I want to try to do that if I can avoid it by just going to the fourth finger instead? And boom, I got all this area right down here where my thumb is already waiting to get on it. All right, so that's, yeah, abstractly put. I will put that more succinctly into a rule for you as we go. But essentially, yeah, we're thinking I'm switching over to which finger? Well, whichever one makes more sense, right? And you could experiment with it. But below, you'll have a chart with all of the preferred sort of fingerings, and that's why they're preferred. That's why they make sense. It's because they enable you to keep moving with the most efficiency, i.e. we're not moving extra steps, and we're not getting stuck. We're not getting tripped up, right? All right, cool. So, we remember the chromatic scale. We already kind of learned about that. And there's a certain way to move on that. It basically you don't have to focus on this right now, but just so you know, not every scale is 7 notes, right? Some of them are more or less. Chromatic scale is all of them. So the way that we do that is we don't actually use too many fingers. We're just going to use the first 3 fingers, and we're mainly using our first and third finger. So if you want to try this, cool. You don't need to memorize it yet. What I really want you to focus on is that major scale. And why is that? Again, it's very memorable. It's very recognizable. We've all heard it. We've all heard it a million times. We can all tell do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do pretty easy. So, but just so you see some other patterns of motion, chromatic scale, for instance, is I'm just bouncing back and forth with this first and third finger. And then when I get here, if I do that, it's gonna set me up a little weird, right? So what I have is this nice, boom, middle connector finger to bring us right back to that same pattern. 1 3 1 3 1 3, another middle connector, right? So these 2 areas where there's only 2 areas on the keyboard where there's 2 white keys right next to each other, and that's where I'm going to use on the chromatic scale this middle finger. All right, so we'll come back to that later. What I want you to practice this time is that major scale. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And I really want you to practice with both hands. And I really want you to practice going down as well as going up. And yes, of course, you'll have a bias towards one hand, right? Like I said, that's the hand you're going to want to maybe use a little bit less. Use the hand that's strongest a little bit less. Just give a little more time and love to the non-dominant hand so that you have the best chance to be the most versatile piano player that you can be. Also, yeah, it's easy to we get a sense of accomplishment. We get that dopamine rush from playing something right with that right hand. So it's real easy to get seduced into just I'll just keep doing that because it feels good because I did it right. But if you can push through that, and you'll really get that payoff. You'll get that long haul reward by setting up full ambidexterity, right? Use of both hands and balance. So yeah, anytime I ask you to play a scale, I'm asking you to do it with both hands, up and down, and maybe even start and focus more on your non-dominant hand. All right, so today I want you to work up to practicing eventually one scale with both hands simultaneously, but today playing a scale with one hand, with each hand though. And then I think the best one to start with is the F sharp. So that is the lower of the three queens. That's the note we'll start on, and then we're gonna do the whole half, whole half, whole half, whole half. Right? Make a song, do something, whatever helps you remember that. Write it down. You know, just stick it on a little note on your keyboard. I got notes, right? I put on my keyboard. Tell me what I'm practicing, or remind me, just because I don't want to remember it all the time. So we'll start practicing that scale with each hand individually, like I said. And then why would I choose this? Why would I choose this note, right? So there's a real easy note that's really common if you've taken piano courses before. You probably started with this note, right? And that's a C. That's below our two kings, right below the two kings. Then the white note right below it, it's called a C. And why is C often the one that's started with? Because if you play it all the way up, all white keys, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That's the one major scale I was talking about, where you only have to play white keys, right? And that's great. It's easy mnemonic device, right? You can just see it, right? Find that C, go to your two kings, go right below them, start there. And especially if you don't have a lot of exposure to the sound of the do, re, mi, the solfege they call it, the way of describing a major scale, then I actually would start with that, right? Just so you get that sound in your head. Just go to the bottom of the two kings and play those. You know, you can use one finger just to get that sound in your head, because I think it's great to have all these visual patterns I'm talking about, but the primary thing we're doing here is sound. We're making sound, right? And we want to be able to depend on our ear above our eye. Our eye is important, but our ear is the main thing we want to depend on. So good. If you don't know the do, re, mi, get it in your head by playing that. But if you already do, I really want to emphasize this pattern recognition idea. First and foremost, we want to understand what we're doing rather than just memorizing or depending on some kind of easy trick like all the white keys, right? That would be too easy right now. That's not actually pattern recognition. So that's why we're starting. And easy is cool, but that could lead to laziness, and we really want to set a foundation in knowledge, in understanding. And this is literally the furthest note away from the C, right? The most difficult, weirdest scale. But if you can do this first, if you focus on this first, then anything else will be easier. So so that's why we're starting with that one. That's why we're starting with our F sharp, with the lowest of the three queens, because we're applying this pattern consciously. And this visual structure, seeing it, you know, hearing it, without depending on the crutch of just all white keys, is what's going to actually give you that insight into understanding the scale's unique structure. So that's going to make you a conscious mover. That's the point. We want to be consciously moving around the keyboard. All right, like I said, we'll come back to this, but if you want to do that chromatic scale too, that will be an extra credit, right? And that gives you a real sense of fluency. And if you can do that, because we're not always playing one scale, we're moving around, we're shifting scales as we play, etc. So we'll come back to that. But if you want to do that, that would be extra credit. That would be like doing your extra jumping jacks or whatever. We'll also come back to the minor scale. That's another one. It's a really cool sound. Right, so if we look at our C, right, we change two notes, and it changes the whole, actually three notes rather, and it changes the whole feel. Right, and again, like I said, we're thinking about movement. We're thinking about the patterns created by that movement. So how do we move? How do those movements create patterns? And then we're thinking about how do those patterns move us? How do they feel? How do they emotion, right? How do they move us? It has a very certain feel to it, right? Different feel, cooler. It's definitely it's a good vibe, right? And it can help you. We'll get to it very soon, but let's start with that goofy, happy major scale. It's super recognizable, and let's start on the more challenging space. Anyways, enough ranting. Happy practicing, y'all. Thank you for rocking with me. Hit me up with questions. I am doing private lessons as well, so if you want me to explain this all in a little bit more detail, a little slower to you, hit me up. I'm going to establish a Patreon. I'm going to get that going, but I wanted to give away all this important info for those of you who don't have bread or just want to study on your own time whenever you can. Hopefully this helps you. Peace and happy practicing.